Good afternoon, everyone. So, as you heard, I'm Mike Purcell, an industry principal at OSIsoft. Just to give you a little bit of an idea what the industry principals do at OSIsoft, it's a group of people that have expertise in our core industries that we work with. So when I say expertise, most of the people who are industry principals come from the industry that they're the principal for. So I'm actually the industry principal for life sciences. I run the group for industry principals now, but I'm from the life sciences group, but also have had extensive experience in oil and gas. So I'm going to be covering two of the industries in this session. The first is going to be oil and gas, and the second is going to be life sciences. But part of the role of the industry principal is to talk with customers and people who are prospective customers, get their understanding of how they can use the PI system in business situations to get the most value out of the system. And what are some of the things that are needed to do that? If it's something that we already provide, that's great. It may be something that a feature that needs to be added that you request for in the future. The other areas that we can help our customers with is to put them in touch with each other. So common questions to get asked are, if I'm from an industry, I don't want to be the first one to do something. So can you tell me who else has done something like this? So I could maybe talk to them or look at what they did. So as part of this talk, I'm going to go into a couple of use cases and for different scenarios, but these are by no means all scenarios in these industries, how people are using the PI system, but just to give a couple of examples of how people are using the PI system. So with that, I'm going to start off with give a little overview of the oil and gas market and where PI plays into that. So there's, as you know, there's a number of different segments within the oil and gas space. There's production, which is the drilling, essentially. That's worldwide. There's a lot of production going on in North America right now around natural gas. There's areas like the North Sea for oil and gas, the Middle East, obviously. So the whole idea of producing that energy throughout the world, the total production capacity in the world, 65% of that usage is covered by the PI system. So we have a very high percentage of use in the production side of things. In midstream, which is essentially the pipelines, the transportation, how to get the energy from one place to the other, we're at 35%. Within liquefied natural gas and regas, it's 65%. So again, a significant percentage. For those of you not in the oil and gas industry, what regas is for is it's converting natural gas into a liquefied form, transporting it, and then transforming it back into a gas. In hydrocarbon processing, we cover about 60% of the market in the world. So that is the refining side of the business. And then in biofuels, we have about 15%. So across those different work streams, how are the oil and gas industries using the PI system? How are they leveraging it to solve challenges and take advantage of technology trends? So there's a number of key areas where they're doing that. The first, around asset safety, reliability, integrity, and performance management. The whole idea of risk mitigation, making sure that, for one thing, that the equipment is performing as optimally as possible, but also making sure that there's not a safety risk with that equipment. Another area of importance is cost reduction. We're all driving down, even though we're producing energy, it's a highly energy-intensive industry, so they also would like to save energy. So reducing those costs, but also not just the energy costs, but maintenance costs, IT costs, and some of the chemicals used in some of the processing, for instance, fracking chemicals. Another main usage is to increase profitability, to get the most out of your utilization, to increase yields, to reduce loss of energy, of hydrocarbon loss, and to optimize your production, continually optimize it. So the whole idea of continuous process improvement, Six Sigma. Another area I mentioned this morning is around regulatory compliance and the concept of maintaining a social license to operate. That means is being a good corporate citizen, not polluting unnecessarily. In some cases, there is pollution that occurs, but trying to mitigate that and be as clean as possible. And with a number of these issues, the amount of compliance is continuing to increase. So you need to have access to your emission data, your drilling data, your water injection data. All of that information needs to be available for environmental protection agencies to be able to look at. And then the whole idea of optimizing your workforce, empowering the workforce by giving them more information, more. Don't like to say data because it's really they need the information. Data in and of itself is not useful. It's how putting it in the right context so they have the information to act correctly. So in this case, I just want to drill down a little bit more specifically into the refining side of things, just to give an idea of some visualization of how customers are using it. So in the first example there, Talisman, basically using the PI system for managing their assets, understanding when maintenance needs to be done, implementing condition-based maintenance. So using actual runtime on equipment to do the maintenance rather than doing calendar-based maintenance. Significantly reduces cost of unnecessary maintenance, but it also reduces equipment failure. Second is environmental and utilities management with Sun Chemical as an example of that. So having a dashboard of looking at what's going on at a particular point in time, setting thresholds and highlights. So with the green, yellow, and red, if there's conditions that are trending in a bad direction. The next is Chevron. So in this case, it's a dashboard that they built to look at in real time. It's a number of different metrics that they're looking at here, but it's the visibility into the operations, yield accounting, the KPIs being updated in real time, and having a model of what determines these conditions with the red, green, and yellow again is what is your plan and how are you doing actually against plan? So the plan versus actual comparison. Suncor on the bottom here is, this is around safety. So managing the systems that could pose a risk to human health or safety. Having a dashboard to be able to do that. The next was the Rhodia using PI as the key enabler for their MES strategy. Actually, we'll go into a little bit more detail on that too, on how PI fits into the MES strategy, or the S95 stack with MES being a key component and PI being a key component. And then the last one is Pertamina, with the whole idea of value chain integration and getting overall situational awareness where things are occurring in real time. I used this picture this morning and kind of went through it very quickly, but I'm going to spend a little bit more time on it right now. So the whole idea of moving applications and integrating solutions with the data infrastructure, the whole idea of being able to simplify functionality by building it once, reusing it many times, and then also the idea of standardization. It's important, there's a couple pieces that are important there. Simplification is obviously good because it is less costly to maintain. It's off the shelf. But the idea of standardization, if you're building pieces of functionality or applications individually, multiple different ways, the chances of comparing like to like is reduced greatly. So if you use core functionality as part of the infrastructure for your applications, you can be more assured that you're looking at the same things when you're doing comparisons. So again, in this case, these applications in the middle are being moved more and more into that infrastructure layer, the Pi layer, to do some of these things. So you don't have standalone applications doing it. It's embedded in your overall infrastructure. Just wait for the animation to go. And again, some of it is completely moved into the infrastructure, and some of it is a blend where there are standalone applications, but they can take advantage of a key set of features that are embedded in the infrastructure. So this slide, again, this is a repeat from this morning. I touched on it briefly this morning. But it is important to realize that while there is key value in getting this visibility, and that's what I talk about with this first phase is, it's really just being able to get that situational awareness, understanding what's going on right now. That is a huge boost of efficiency and access to data. Once people start to see that data, then they think of additional things that they can do with it. So different applications or functions. So it could be operations management. It could be equipment health, putting in an OEE process to optimize your equipment. The environmental reporting. A lot of people put Pi systems into for maybe an initiative such as OEE to monitor equipment, and then quickly realize, well, I have all this data. I have data on my energy usage. Why don't I use it to manage my energy? Look at how it's being used. Let's look at what my emissions are, and then use the Pi system for that type of functionality as well. Performance management is another one. How is the company performing as a whole? So it's the whole idea of, as time progresses, having access to this information becomes more and more valuable, and you can do more and more things with it. So now I'm just going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the case studies. So in this case, from Rhodia, we see how the Pi system was implemented as the key infrastructure of the overall MES strategy. So by leveraging an extensible platform, the Pi system, Rhodia was able to build a global standard using templates and standard calculations, KPIs, and applications. What this meant was that across multiple sites, you'd be able to get a common view of the operations and align the overall enterprise with a common base of information to drive the overall corporate strategy. So again, being able to compare like to like, you can take best practices that are achieved at one site and leverage that at another site. Another example in this is Pemex. So what Pemex wanted to do was to implement a standardized operational window for the refining division. So they were facing a number of challenges. They had issues with low performance and utilization of the refineries, the overall reliability, and the yield from the refineries. They weren't able to share, as I mentioned in the previous case, they weren't able to share best practices across the division and throughout the division. And they weren't able to look at the entire Pemex value chain in real time. They had to piece together information to generate reports. So Pemex opted to put in a Pi system. They had some pockets of Pi, but they expanded it more across the whole refining division. So they used the Pi system to provide that integration and applications at that infrastructure level. They used Pi AF and Pi Web Parts as foundational components to create this overall dashboard KPI view. And they developed, based on that, that's how they developed their operational window for enterprise viewing into the Pemex refining division. So as a result of this, they had one single operational window for all of the refining operations. It's web-based, it's very simple to manage, and it's prioritized information that's presented in the context. As you can see, it's very simple, the overview of the data. It's a very simple dashboard for people to navigate through and look at the information. All the KPIs, again, are standardized. So you have the same KPIs you're measuring, the same across refineries. The equipment underneath could be completely different, but by using this templatization, you're able to get the key information that you need from each of the individual refineries. So another example is Safeco, which is a fertilizer company. And they were having problems with asset reliability and performance, energy management, and issues with their electrical infrastructure. They needed better visualization and mobility. They had to implement cybersecurity practices that were not in place at the time. And they had to provide this comprehensive vision across the value chain so they could look at the different operational units like manufacturing, marketing, trading, and logistics. So Safeco actually signed an EA with OSI. So for those of you who don't know what an EA is, it's basically an enterprise agreement that provides unlimited use of OSI software across their assets. So they had 5 complexes that installed Pi, headquarters, and data centers. They standardized as the overall infrastructure for any integration that was going to be done, as well as the base support for the MES implementation they had. And they used standardized templates similar to Pemex for calculations, applications, and KPIs. So they were able to use the native capabilities of the Pi system to address the cybersecurity system. So Pi Security integrated with their overall system security. LDAP was used to address the cybersecurity issues. So in the end, they had overall asset reliability. They were able to compare assets across sides of the supply chain and monitor them and address issues. They improved their energy efficiency and their overall performance. They aligned the organization with access to the information, so it empowered ownership in the individuals at the different locations to use their creativity to develop new KPIs and new applications on the Pi infrastructure. They, for the first time, had real-time situational awareness across the whole value chain, so they were able to see what was going on in all of the different divisions of the company. And this is a key element of their corporate strategy for ongoing sustainability and growth and profitability. So another example here is Talisman in the upstream space for the overall production and how they were having issues with their rotating equipment. They had a vast, diverse, critical rotating equipment environment. They were having issues with the overall integrity and reliability and production losses with this equipment. They were unable to capture and leverage the knowledge of the subject matter experts across the divisions. So it was very siloed to each of the, not divisions, but each of the individual assets. There was inconsistencies, again, because it was siloed. There was inconsistencies in the analytics, how things were visualized, what the KPIs were, how reports were done. So they put a program in place that was known as the Strategic Rotating Equipment Excellence Program. It's not the most creative name, but it works. So they created they used the Pi system then to monitor 2,900 pieces of critical equipment with the goal of improving that reliability, improving the integrity, and also to standardize and provide a consistent display, calculation, KPIs, all of that information. They were then able to continuously monitor the values against limits and thresholds that they had set. So basically the idea, again, of setting what are the correct operating conditions and being notified when things start to trend outside of that. And by doing this, improving the usage and the efficiency of the rotating equipment, they were significantly able to improve their overall production goals. So now I'm going to move into the life sciences space and talk a little bit about that and how PI fits in life sciences. So since we're talking about life sciences, what's the definition of life sciences? So the dictionary definition is generally life sciences is any science that's involved with living organisms. That's not exactly what I mean when I'm talking about life sciences as one of our industries within OSIsoft. What we're talking about is more from the commercial perspective. So it's essentially industries such as pharmaceuticals, biopharmaceuticals, medical devices, and medicine delivery devices that are industries that essentially produce therapeutic products that go into the human body. It's kind of a broad definition, but that is the standard term that's used in the industry as life sciences. So for those of you in the life sciences, you're probably familiar with a lot of these acronyms. For those of you not, probably don't know what they mean. Some you may. S95 is not specific to the life sciences industry. It's an ISA industry standard. But things like QBD, which means quality by design. FDA is a Food and Drug Administration in the United States. In Japan, it's the Pharmaceutical and Medical Devices Agency. There's other terms like GMP, which I'll explain in more detail. There's types of citations that are issued by regulatory agencies that are referred to as 483s. But essentially, there's a lot of regulation in the life science industry because you're directly impacting human health, and if there's a bad pharmaceutical drug, it can have significant impact on life. So all of this terminology and all of these acronyms boil down to one thing. The goal is to produce quality products that are stable over time based on the right conditions and that are effective. So there's a lot of acronyms and a lot of processes and guidance and procedure that all drive to these three main goals. So as I mentioned, one of the key goals is this concept of CGMP. Again, CGMP is not specific to the life sciences industry, but it is most commonly used there. What it means is, in English, it's CGMP is current good manufacturing practice. So it's a set of controls and practices to ensure that all processes are clearly defined, controlled, and understood. Any changes that are made to these approved controls and practices must be documented and tested. So the whole idea is to ensure that you've defined good processes to manufacture what you said you're going to manufacture, and that you've documented what those processes are, and that those processes are maintained. So it's really not that complicated. Essentially, it's traceability of requirements through implementation and maintenance of a system. If you're putting a system in, there's a reason you're doing it. That's your requirements. You're putting it in a certain way. That affects the implementation. And then you have to have records of any changes that you make to that system. So from the FDA's perspective, and almost all regulatory agencies around the world, the mantra is, if it isn't written, it didn't happen. So essentially, if you can't produce evidence that you did something, then it didn't happen, and you are setting yourself up for risk. So from CGMP, you commonly hear the term validation, and validation is a process that a life sciences company goes around to produce this documented evidence that a system has been implemented according to the CGMP practices. So it really is what it says it is. It's to maintain good practices, but it's also the law. So there can be severe financial and criminal penalties associated if you don't comply. So just to give an example, how the FDA views it, and again, most regulatory agencies are very similar around the world on how they look at the systems. What the system is, it's part of the process that you see down here. So what are the process parameters parameters, what are the attributes of what you're making, those then affect the overall quality of the product that you're producing. So the process and the product are tied together very tightly, because you cannot make a good product without having a good process and good procedures in place. But ultimately, how this is performed directly affects the patient. So that's how that traceability from the FDA's perspective goes back to ultimately to the patient. So it's back to the quality, efficacy, and safety. And as I mentioned, there are severe penalties. As an example, there's headlines in the news. If this would switch. Sorry, move my mouse around here. Do this. So, for example, this was a recent case where Ranbaxy was fined $500 million to end a significant number of criminal and civil cases around manufactured data. So, reporting falsely on batches or products that were being made. So the executive officers of these companies can be held criminally responsible too. So there's a lot of incentive to making sure that you follow the right procedures. So just to give an example of where pi is used in the life sciences industry, there's a significant install base of pi in this industry. 10 of the top 10 pharmaceutical companies use the pi system, and 8 of the 10 top biopharmaceutical companies also use the pi system. The distinction between pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical is how the end product is made. Essentially, a biopharmaceutical is a large molecule derived from a living organism, where the pharmaceutical is more of a chemical process. And the companies are classified, whether they're pharmaceutical or biopharmaceutical, in the industry in general, based on where the majority of their revenue comes from. So that's how we categorize them as well. And 8 of the top 20 life science companies in the world are enterprise agreement customers. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the ability to deploy pi throughout the organization, unlimited. So a number of the big players in the industry. One asked not to have their logo used, so that's the anonymous one. So how is pi used in the life sciences industry? There's a number of uses of pi in this industry. Like most industries, and I hope I'm highlighting the right one, the site-wide process visibility is usually the first step. People just want to see what's going on. So I want to put pi in because I'm doing a lot of manufacturing. There's a lot of complex processes. I have a lot of equipment. I just need to see what's going on. So that is not really unique to the life sciences industry, but it is one of the key drivers for putting it in. But once the pi system is in, then you can do things like incident investigations. So in the life sciences industry, as part of the patent approval, you've submitted, there's certain metrics that you have to measure and report on, and some of these are critical process parameters and they're quality parameters. If something trends out of those ranges or starts to trend in that direction, you need to investigate what happened so it doesn't happen again. So that's what an incident investigation is. And if you're on a borderline of a threshold, then you have to document that in your batch report. So going back to what I said earlier, the regulatory agencies say if it's not written, it didn't happen. So every batch from a life sciences company, pharmaceutical companies specifically have batches, every batch has to have an electronic or a paper trail of what occurred. So when they're audited, they can produce that information. Things that tend out of that, you can do these incident investigations to look down into it. So pi is used heavily in that. Finding out what happened right before an incident occurred, what happened after it, what other types of issues were going on at the same time, so that you can identify the cause of it and prevent it from happening again. Batch release and quality deviation reviews. The whole idea of before you can release a batch to the next phase, whether it's making a pill or an injectable, or whatever the next phase of the process is, you need to verify that that batch is of the right quality. And a lot of times that's done in the past in the life sciences industry by reviewing large paper reports from quality groups. So PI is put in place to automate that, provide a lot of that information electronically, which is not only faster to process, but it's actually more, it's less error prone than manually putting that data in. Deviation reviews, I talked a little bit about incident investigations. A deviation review is a similar type of thing. You've deviated from what you've said you were going to do in a manufacturing process. You need to go back and look for why that happened. The remote monitoring and alerting, again, you can define rules, and you want to be able to notify people that something has happened before it becomes critical. Most of pharmaceutical processing and medical device processing, the end products are very expensive. There's cases where a single batch of material can be worth millions of dollars, US dollars, or billions of US dollars in some cases, particularly some of the very expensive blood hemophilia drugs is an example that comes to mind. One batch is worth more than $1 billion US dollars. So you don't want to lose those. So while the process is going on, you want to be notified as early as possible. Other uses are the whole idea of process development and scale up, which is the tech transfer. So this is the area where when a drug's been approved, you go into what's called glass labs, and you develop what your process is going to ultimately be for full-scale manufacturing. And you need to transfer that information up from the glass labs to the full-scale manufacturing and back down to the glass lab. So it's a bidirectional transfer of information. The PI system, by implementing that, allows that easy transfer of information. PAT, QBD, and CPV are terms from the regulatory agencies that provide guidance. Essentially what they are is PAT means process analytic technology, QBD is quality by design, and CPV is continuous process verification. All of them, what they were intended to do is to move the life sciences industry into a state that was comparable with the rest of manufacturing industries. In the past, it was very manual, very paper-based. The concept of this guidance is to say this is what's acceptable from a regulatory perspective to do things like testing the product while you're making it, rather than waiting, taking it offline, taking a sample and testing it and waiting for those results. So it's that whole idea of pulling that information in the process and the quality information in real time. PI is obviously a key component of that when you're talking about the data-intensive process, and PI is the facilitation device for that. Another key area we're seeing is the integration with LIMS, MES, and ERP systems. Being able to get that data outside of those individual silos and bring it up to the higher level business systems. Environmental monitoring and reporting. One of the key metrics I talked about earlier was the stability of the drug, and in order to do that, there's certain conditions for certain drugs that needs to be maintained at. So it may be temperature, humidity, whatever that is. So you need to measure that information as well. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are just to give an example of some of the use cases around in life sciences that are not just pulling up one tag and trending it. This is business use cases of how the systems are used. So these are some of the top pain points within the life sciences industry, and that's what they're using PI to help address. So the whole idea of compliance, I talked about CGMP and validation. It is that same concept. PI is an off-the-shelf system, a COT system as it's referred to, commercial off-the-shelf. Those systems are significantly less burdensome from a compliance validation perspective than a custom situation. Normalizing and exposing the data from multiple systems. That's in the life sciences industry. There's an enormous amount of different pieces of equipment, different systems that need to all be brought together and normalized. So that's a key area in life sciences as well. The quality by design I had mentioned, QBD, and the whole issue around CPV, which is the continuous process verification, and quality by design. These are issues that are driving the industry. Batch reporting, again, you have to have evidence of every batch that's made. There's, sorry, just losing the mouse here. There it is. Okay. So those are just examples of the pain points in the industry, what's driving them to use the PI system. One of the key areas that I'm going to drill into a little bit more is on the MES side of things. And this is, well, I'm using the example from the life sciences industry. It's not just for life sciences. I get asked quite a bit, where do you see the PI system fitting in the S95 or manufacturing operations management strategy? And generally, you can think of the PI system as sitting in level 2 here. So level 3, I'm sorry. So we're not a process control system. We're actually a data infrastructure that enables applications such as the MES, and also spanning some of the data all the way up into the ERP system. So how does the PI system enable this? So it's a combination of our core products, the PI server, AF for putting the data in context, and event frames, which is the construct of a batch. For the life sciences industry, everything is around a batch. You don't really care what the temperature was at a certain point in time or on a certain day. What you care about is what the temperature was when I was within a certain procedure or certain phase or unit procedure in a process. So it's all relative that you're looking at as opposed to absolute time. So you want to be able to compare how batches are being produced over time. You want to look at a similar product and use that as your benchmarking. So event frames enables that for the life sciences industry. And then getting all that data and collecting it and organizing it is great, but if you can't expose that data to other applications, then it's not that great a tool. So we provide the tools to access the data easily in a number of standard different ways. So you can do web services, JDBC, ODBC. There's an SDK for advanced access to the data, and we can expose the data as a relational database as well. We also support OPC. We can be an OPC server, web services. So there's a number of different ways of getting at that PI data for other applications, be they custom or off the shelf. So just to give a little bit of an idea of how the MES integration that I talked about flows, the control systems and the batch execution systems, any of the systems that were on that bottom layer that I was talking about for the data collection, expose the data to PI. PI has over 450 interfaces for collecting the data. So chances are we can get the data from a piece of equipment that you have. But it's not just pulling data from equipment. There's also higher level interfaces to pull in the context. So one of the areas that I'm talking about here is like a batch execution system interface. Not only do we bring in the data from the batch execution system, but we bring in the context around which unit procedure is being run, which procedure is being run, which phase is being run. So you can look at the data in the appropriate context in PI, and that's automatically collected into the PI system and structured in the PI system in the event frames, like I had mentioned in the previous slide. So then the PI system exposes the data to the MES system. So the MES system uses one of those standard methods for pulling in the PI data. And then PI also pulls in the data, can pull in the data from the MES system. So some of the things that Pi might pull in from an MES system would be manual work instructions or things like that. So it's a bi-directional integration. Some of this has to be configured. Let me step back a little bit. We have off-the-shelf interfaces for some MES systems already. So in the life sciences industry, Verum has a PASX MES system. We have an off-the-shelf interface for connecting to that. Emerson has Syncade as another MES system. We're in the process of building one with Siemens and with Rockwell right now. So our goal ultimately is to have the same number of higher level interfaces with these MES systems as our customers request them. That being said, you don't need the off-the-shelf interface to pull that data into Pi or to expose the data to the MES system. You can use our standard tools to do it, but the interfaces that we build are optimized and they're meant to be easier to implement and more off the shelf. So in that case, this data is then exposed into the MES system, and then we pull the data back from the MES system that we need. So it's not just pulling in the manual work instructions, but other things can be pulled back into the Pi system that can affect the overall quality of manufacturing process. So what I'm talking about here is when you think of a batch report, you generally think about the steps that went into making the final drug, whether it be mixing, boiling, heating, those kinds of things that affect the ultimate end quality of the product you're making. And it doesn't have to be a drug. I was saying drug because it's life science, but there's also chemical industries and other industries that would implement MES systems. So we could pull in that key data that is part of the manufacturing, but then there's also other steps that the MES knows about that we can pull that context in as well. So you could think of things like a CIP phase, which is clean in place phase, or a sterilization phase, which is a phase that is applied to a piece of equipment but isn't necessarily part of the information related to a product. But the MES system has that information, and we could pull that information in. So someone doing the analytics using the Pi system can not only look at the core process data that affects the product, but any of the ancillary data around it that could possibly affect it as well. So then, there we go, get that going. There we go. So generally, with most of our customers that have MES systems, the recipe downloads and the synchronization between the MES and the control system are handled directly between the MES and the control system. So you could think of this as like if it's a weigh instruction. The weigh instruction goes to the piece of equipment that's doing the weighing, that gets issues the weigh instruction, and then says, yes, we executed it. This is the most common way that Pi is implemented and integrated with an MES system. However, we have customers that have asked to do this, and in this case, that example that I just used, the weigh instruction actually is passed from the MES system to the Pi server and then ultimately down to the control system. So Pi is used as the gateway for that synchronization piece of it as well. This is heavily dependent on your IT infrastructure and making sure that you have the right level of real-time access to the data, but it works very well in that environment too. And both of those scenarios that I talked about are off-the-shelf scenarios with OSI products. It doesn't involve any type of customization. This already exists and can be implemented either way. We have had some potential requests in the future to also pass recipes through the Pi server down to the control systems, but we don't do that now. This would be something that would require further enhancements. And we honestly have not had the request from anyone yet to do it. There's been interest, but no specific request. But that kind of gives the overview of how the integration works with the MES system and the Pi system, who's responsible for what. So that being said, I'm going to just jump into a couple of examples from the life sciences industry. So these examples were derived from talks that our customers have given at our user conferences. So essentially, it explains the situation, what the implementation was, the solution was, will be in here, and then what are the results that were achieved. So in this case, this was given by Pete Wise from Genentech, which is a division of Roche. It was focused on leveraging the newest client tool that we have, CoreSite, to increase efficiency in process development, which is very critical within Roche because unlike a lot of the life science companies, they have a very large pipeline of new drugs in clinical trials that they expect to get approval for. So this, in the process development area, they were using CoreSite to replace a custom-made tool that they had that was very expensive to enhance and support and obviously validate. And it lacks some of the critical mobility features that were needed. So the CoreSite was deployed, targeted at a large group of browser-based users to share information, get a common view, common access to the data. And they also were heavy users of Macs and iPads, so having the capability to use Macs and iPads was a strong benefit for them. So another case was Abbott. Abbott is one of the EA customers that I talked about earlier. This is an example where they use predictive maintenance for where Pi was integrated in with the Maximo system. So getting actual runtime information on pieces of equipment, integrating that into the Maximo system for scheduling work orders. Rather than doing calendar-based maintenance, again, you're doing maintenance when it needs to be done so that you don't have equipment failures and you aren't wasting maintenance time. This is an example from Kevin Crean from J&J. One of the acronyms that I talked about earlier was CPV, the continuous process verification. So Kevin worked quite heavily with our Center of Excellence team under the enterprise agreement, and they were able to implement an infrastructure to improve compliance in alignment with the continuous process verification guidance. So the concept is to bring together the product quality data and the process data to allow easier deployment of all products in a facility that demonstrates that they have overall control of their processes and that they're able to monitor and produce evidence of the quality attributes and the process attributes in a standard way. So another example from Roche here. They're using Pi as a tool to implement a true GMP environment. So this is really the textbook way of what I was talking about earlier of implementing a system in a good manufacturing process environment. How they deployed it enabled an enterprise-wide KPI and standard visualization that improved efficiency and simplified overall processes. Sanofi Pasteur gave this talk. It was for Pi for deviation analysis and identifying problems before they result in the loss of a batch. As I mentioned earlier, these batches are very expensive, so anything you can do to avoid having to throw away a batch is very beneficial to the bottom line of a company. So they use Pi in a standardly implemented way for the life sciences industry. They were able to reduce startup and cycle times and to do batch reporting. So this is a good situation of the example I used earlier. They put Pi in at first to do that situational awareness, just get this view of what's going on. But over time, they've been able to use it for all these other benefits that they didn't envision at the beginning. So this case, Lilly, the example here, Lilly put Pi in across multiple sites to get an enterprise view of the products and the processes across those sites. They used dashboards to monitor the overall, how the facilities were performing, and they also used it to reduce their energy costs at these facilities and reduce commodity consumptions that was increasing too. Another case from Genentech, this was using Pi as an analytic tool to gain better process understanding. So Pi forms that baseline data infrastructure to get all the information in that they can then use third-party tools that do multivariate analysis. So in this case, they use a tool from Umetrics called SBAL. So we provide the platform for pulling all of that information together, and then Umetrics tools sit on top of that to use that data as component of their analytics. This was an example from J&J in Ireland, another J&J site in Ireland, that demonstrate the integration with their MES system, which in this case was Verum PASX. One of the things they used to say was that at this site that they weren't sure whether they were making drugs or making paper, because it seemed like they were making more paper than drugs, their documentation of what they were doing. So by putting in this solution with the integration with the MES, they were able to implement the concept of batch reporting by exception. So rather than just do a dump of every piece of information you have, you only report on the areas where there's questionable variances. So by doing this, they were able to reduce a batch report from around 1,000 pages, which, as you can imagine, takes a long time to review, down to a 2-page batch report. So there's significant savings in just the time to review that batch, but it also improved the quality because the system detects the ranges that are starting to trend badly rather than relying on a human to find it on page 599 of a 1,000-page batch report. In this case, Lanza, who's a contract manufacturer, they used the Pi infrastructure with a tool that OSI has for batch reporting called RT Reports. And this is another case of reporting by exception to reduce that review process. In this case, they used RT Reports. In the previous case with J&J, they used the batch reporting capability of the Verum system, which used the Pi data as the source of their reporting. Another MES integration case was, this is Bristol Myers Squibb, and in this case they were not using Verum, they were using Emerson's Syncade MES system. Again, it was the flow, that integration was just as I showed in that design of how the data flowed. This case shows an example of integrating the Pi data with SAP data. So Amgen did this to improve their overall operational awareness and efficiency, which would then lead to improved quality and increasing the yield of the products they're producing. So the way this was implemented was using the Pi system, integrated with the SAP system using MII tools from SAP. And the MII tools use standard data access into the Pi system to pull that data into SAP, and vice versa, get SAP data into the Pi system. So that being said, I want to thank all of you for listening and see if anyone had any questions.